Welcome everyone to this final video on Everything is Illuminated, and actually the final video of the course. Towards the end of this video, I will say a few things about the final essays I'm going to ask you to write. The topic of this video is photography. It's what does the novel have to say about photography? And I think it offers us a useful and interesting counterpoint to the 4 short stories that we've read on photography. To an extent, some of the stories we've read take us to the power of photography and the photographic process, but all of them, I think, in different ways, take us also to the limits of it and the dangers of it and the problems of it. I mean, just think about these extraordinary characters we've encountered, including that crazy guy on the roof of the house throwing stones, right? And then there's Antonino. So this novel, I think, offers us a more positive reflection on photography and the photographic process. In many ways, it seems to suggest that the photograph is the only thing that reveals truth, which is a truth that is then subject to the randomness and contingencies of the signifying chain when we try to describe what we're looking at. But there is a truth inherent in the photograph itself. I mean, Cynthia Ozick is suggesting that in her short story Shot as well. But yeah, I think Jonathan Safran Foer very much takes the view that there is, a photograph, and then there's the problem of having to describe it. And when we do that, we have to use all these bloody words that get in the way and cause problems. Let's just remind ourselves of exactly what he's saying here about that. This is on page 203. I took you here before, but it's worth repeating. Music is beautiful. We often blame our treatment throughout history, the Jews, on terrible misunderstandings. Words never mean what we want them to mean. If we communicated with something like music, we would never be misunderstood because there is nothing in music to understand. And so we have the origin of chanting and the humming. Until we find this new way of speaking, until we can find a non-approximate vocabulary, nonsense words are the best thing we've got. Well, I think it's not just music. I think that it seems that for Jonathan Safran Foer, it's also perhaps the photograph in quite a profound way. As an example of that, we should turn to the Herschel photograph, because there is a photograph that does reveal a truth that has been covered up. And of course, it is the actual identity of Alex's grandfather, not Alexander, but Eli. And with that truth revealed by a photograph comes his confession, comes everything else that attaches to the grandfather here. And what I think is particularly interesting is that this photograph has the effect that it has on these characters and in this novel because of a punctum moment experienced by the spectator, by Jonathan. Let's look at that happening. It's on page 225. So they're rummaging around in this box given to them by Lister. And here grandfather said and excavated a photograph. A simple one, too unfortunate. I thought it felt like something different. So it seems to be unary. It seems to be just an obvious little photograph. He placed the photograph on the table without examining it. Also, I did not examine it, because why should I reasoned. Grandfather was correct. It appeared very simple and ordinary. There were likely 100 photographs of this manner in the box. The rapid view that I presented it showed me nothing abnormal. It was 3 men, or perhaps 4. Now you, he told me, and I turned my head and inserted my hand. Because my head was turned to not view in the box, I was witnessing Jonathan while my hand investigated. A soft thing, a rough thing. Jonathan moved the photograph to his face, not because he was an interested person, but because there was nothing else to do at the moment while I searched the box. This is what I remember. He ate a hand of peanuts, and let a handful descend to the floor for Sammy Davis Jr. He made a petite drink from his vodka. He looked away from the photograph for a moment. I felt a feather and a bone. Then I remember this. He looked at the photograph again. I felt a smooth thing, a petite thing. He looked away from the photograph. He looked at it again. He looked away. A hard thing, a candle, a square thing, a prick from a pin. Bang, there it is again. Oh my God, he said, and there's that expression again. And he had the photograph up to the light of the candle, then he put it down, then he held it again, and this time put it close to my face, so that he could observe both the photograph and my face at the same time. What's he doing? Grandfather asked. What are you doing? I asked him. Jonathan placed the photograph on the table. It's you. And this eventually connects them, looking at the faces, to the grandfather. And there's the pinprick of memory coming in the form of a punctum. In terms of the photograph and subject identity, these different positions, operator, target, spectator, and how photographs work on human behavior, the grandfather is also, I think, quite illustrative for us here. In the sense, he has occupied the position of spectator, of non-participant in the war, one might say. But here, as a result of this punctum moment and this confrontation, he is directly implicated. He becomes target. That's what happens. That position, that subject identity position shifts. And it leads him to confession. And it leads him to then try and raise the money so that he can try and find Augustine. And it leads him ultimately to suicide. But it's all, if you like, stemming from that punctum moment and the truth that the photograph reveals. And I think there's an interesting contrast we can make here with Lister, because Lister does not become spectator. She does not become participant, non-participant. She is, in a sense, a perpetual target. She cannot escape from the past and from that traumatic moment. And that's why when Alex confronts her with the Augustine photo, she can't interact with it. She doesn't recognize it. She's simply not able to decipher what the photograph is. It's not until Alex reverses the question and makes her the target of their gaze that she's able to suddenly interpret what she's seeing. Let's look at this, because I think it's quite a nice passage. 117. So here is Alex. I remembered that I'd taken the photograph of Augustine, and although I do not know what it was that coerced me to feel that I should, I rotated back around and displayed the photograph to the woman. This is Lister. Have you ever witnessed anyone in this photograph? She examined it for several moments. No. I do not know why, but I inquired again. Have you ever witnessed anyone in this photograph? No, she said again, although the second no did not seem like a parrot, but like a different variety of no. Have you ever witnessed anyone in this photograph? I inquired. And this time I felt it had I held it very proximal to her face. No, she said again. She seemed like a third variety of no. I put the photograph in her hands. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? No, she said. But in her no, I was certain that I could hear, please persevere, inquire me again. So I did. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? She moved her thumbs over the faces as if she were attempting to erase them. No. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? No, she said, and she put the photograph on her lap. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? I inquired. No, she said, still examining it, but only from the angles of her eyes. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? Nope, she was humming again, and with more volume, and we know why she's humming, don't we now? Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? No, she said, no, I saw a tear descend to her white dress. It too would dry and leave a mark. Have you ever witnessed anyone in the photograph? I inquired, and I felt cruel. I felt like an awful person, but I was certain that I was performing the right thing. No, she said, I've not. They all look like strangers. I perilled everything. Has anyone in this photograph ever witnessed you? Another tear descended. I've been waiting for you for so long. Oh, I pointed to the car. We're searching for Drakenbrod. Ah, she said, and she released a river of tears. You are here. I am it. Lister is living target. She's trapped. She's like an aspic. She just can't get out. She's framed, however you want to put it metaphorically. And this is why she doesn't even know that the war has ended, because it hasn't for her. There's a time slip for you. She doesn't know about America. She still has a baby, right? The baby that died. There's another time slip. And when she does start showing photographs to the others, it's as if she is participant in the way that she's doing it. I won't take you there now, but 153, 154 will help you if you want to go there. There are other interesting little punctum moments in this novel. There's the moment when Jonathan is captured by something he sees in a portrait, and it's the teeth of a baby, and then that connects him, kind of like I was doing with that earlier video, searching for the punctums or chasing the punctum. He then connects it to another image in a photograph of his great-grandmother, and that she's got kind of a weird expression on her face. Let's have a look at this, because it's quite amusing. 165. So he's looking at a picture. He's thinking about his grandfather Saffron, and he says, his teeth. It's the first thing I notice whenever I examine his baby portrait. It's not my dandruff. It's not a smudge of gesso or white paint between my grandfather's thin lips, planted like albino pits and those plum purple gums, is a full set of teeth. The physician must have shrugged, as physicians used to when they couldn't explain a medical phenomenon, and comforted my great-grandmother with talk of good omens. But then there is the family portrait, painted 3 months later. Look, this time at her lips, and you will see that she wasn't entirely comforted. My young great-grandmother was frowning. It was my grandfather's teeth, so admired by his father for the virility, they declared, that made his mother's nipples bloody and sore, that forced her to sleep on her side, and eventually made breastfeeding impossible. It was because of those teeth, those were dinky molars, that my great-grandparents stopped making love and only had one child. And it's because of those teeth that my grandfather was pulled prematurely from his mother's well and never received the nutrients his callow body needed. And now we have the withered arm, and we have in Jonathan Safran Foer's sort of imagination here a narrative that explains what his grandfather did, the sexual exploits, the engagements with Lister and Zosia, the babies that he couldn't save, the fact that he didn't drown himself, the love with Augustine, the way she saved him, and ultimately how he managed to escape going back to the Treblinka death camp. It's all sort of connecting, but it's all connecting because of these punctum moments in images that he's seeing, whether they be portraits or photographs, I acknowledge here. It's also, I think, interesting to note Jonathan's reaction to some of these photographs, because it seems that they are so revealing of a truth that he can barely cope. Or to put it another way, he's actually unable to write about his feelings, about the truth that's being revealed here. Let's look at this passage on 154. I gave the hero, or Jonathan, each picture as she gave it to me, and he could only with difficulty hold it in his hands that were doing so much shaking. It appeared that a part of him wanted to write everything, every word of what occurred into his diary, and a part of him refused to write even one word. He opened the diary and closed it, opened it, closed it, and it looked as though it wanted to fly away from his hands. You know, you might see Jonathan therefore creating Alex, his literary alter ego, as a persona who can then write about what happened. Maybe that is the overarching architecture of this novel. It's almost a therapy, an exercise in therapy. This is how Jonathan, the actual Jonathan Safran Foer, has managed to process what for him has been a traumatic realization. He's created this alter ego and introduced comedy, and in this wonderfully clever way worked things out in this novel. I don't know. I mean, it just seems to me that that's kind of what's happening here, perhaps. It's the other point we're making here, of course, is that there is a truth revealed in these photographs which obtains prior to our attempt to describe what we're seeing, because that's when we're reaching for these nonsense words. On that point, I want us to go back to Roland Barthes. This is an extract you will find in the second Barthes extract that I posted on eLearn. Let's just have a look at what he has to say here. The photograph does not necessarily say what is no longer, but only and for certain what has been. And this distinction is decisive. In front of a photograph, our consciousness does not necessarily take the nostalgic path of memory. How many photographs are outside of individual time? But for every photograph existing in the world, the path of certainty. The photograph's essence is to ratify what it represents. One day I received from a photographer a picture of myself, which I could not remember being taken. For all my efforts, I inspected the tie, the sweater, to discover in what circumstances I'd worn them, to no avail. And yet, because it was a photograph, I could not deny that I'd been there, even if I did not know where. And this distortion between certainty and oblivion gave me a kind of vertigo, something of a detective anguish, and the theme of Blow Up, which is quite a famous film about this, was not far off. I went to the photographer's show as to a police investigation to learn at last what I no longer knew about myself. No writing can give me this certainty. It is the misfortune, but also perhaps the voluptuous pleasure of language, not to be able to authenticate itself. The gnome of language is perhaps this impotence. Or to put it positively, language is by nature fictional. The attempt to render language unfictional requires an enormous apparatus of measurements. We convoke logic, or lacking that, sworn oath. But the photograph is indifferent to all intermediaries. It does not invent. You know what? I guess he's writing this before Photoshop, right? It is authentication itself. The rare artifices it permits are not probative. They are, on the contrary, trick pictures. The photograph is laborious only when it fakes. Okay, fair enough, maybe he is. It's a prophecy in reverse, like Cassandra, but eyes fixed on the past. Photography never lies. Or rather, it can lie as to the meaning of the thing, being by nature tendentious, never as to its existence. I think that's his point. Impotent with regard to general ideas, to fiction, its force is nonetheless superior to everything the human mind can or can have conceived to assure us of reality. But also, this reality is never anything but a contingency. so much, no more. Every photograph is a certificate of presence. This certificate is the new embarrassment which its invention has introduced into the family of images. The first photographs a man contemplated, Nietzsche in front of the dinner table, for instance, must have seemed to him to resemble exactly certain paintings, still the camera obscura. He knew, however, that he was nose to nose with a mutant. A Martian can resemble a man. His consciousness posited the object encountered outside of any analogy, like the ectoplasm of what had been, neither image nor reality, a new being really, a reality one can no longer touch. Perhaps we have an invisible resistance to believing in the past, in history, except in the form of myth. The photograph, for the first time, puts an end to this resistance. Henceforth, the past is as certain as the present. What we see on paper is as certain as what we touch. It is the advent of the photograph, and not, as has been said of the cinema, which divides the history of the world. What I think we can therefore say, kind of drawing on this, is that in this novel, the photograph can be seen to be either the conveyor of a truth prior to language or beyond language, let's call it a first order truth in that sense, or it is the catalyst for the recollection in language of what happened, truth in that sense, which we can call a second order truth. Second order because it's using words. It's taking the photographic image and subjecting it to all the contingencies and randomness of language, of signifiers, of the signifying chain. Let's turn now to the Augustine photograph, because I think that photograph takes us to a different but also a very important property of the photograph, which Barthes describes as ethos. It is that capacity of a photograph, or at least some photographs, to elicit in us, to draw from us emotions that say actually so much about us as the spectator. So in different ways and for different reasons, Jonathan, Alex, and the grandfather all spectate or react to the Augustine photograph in a way that makes them fall for her, be in love with her, associate her at least with feelings of love. Let's trace this. So it begins on 24. Thank you for the reproduction of the photograph of Augustine with her family. I've thought without end of what you said about falling in love with her. Okay, from there to 61. It seems so improbable that he could have loved her. But isn't there something strange about the picture, the closeness between them, even though they're not looking at each other? I mean, that's a punctum. I'm just thinking that that's a kind of punctum moment that Alex is revealing here. The closeness between the characters, even though they're not looking at each other, the way that they aren't looking at each other, the distance, it's very powerful, don't you think? And then the words on the back. Then to page 102. So Alex is looking at his grandfather. He's got some photographs. I'm certain that he was having memories for when he was only a boy and not an old man. The second night he was crying, he had the photograph of Augustine in his hands. Augustine, I could hear him say, Augustine. And then 2:41. Yeah, and we did this in the last video. So I do not believe in the Augustine the grandfather we're searching for. The woman in the photograph is alive, I'm sure of that. But I'm also aware that she's not Herschel, as grandfather wanted her to be, and she's not my grandmother, as he wanted her to be, and she's not father, as he wanted her to be. If I gave him the money, he would have found her, and he would have seen who she really is, and this would have killed him. I'm not saying this metaphorically. It would have killed him. So their reactions here, however different or similar, but they seem to be the sort of honest emotions that are elicited or drawn out by the photograph. And the subsequent confusion, which in a sense drives the plot of the novel, is all because of the signifier or label which is attached to the photograph. 66. Sorry, page 60. So they're looking at it, and then, how do you know that her name is Augustine? I guess I don't really, says Jonathan. On the back, see here? See written a few words in my grandfather's writing, I think. Maybe not. It's in Yiddish. It says, "This is me with Augustine, February the 21st, 1943. It's very difficult to read. Well, okay, so why do you think he remarks only on Augustine and not these other two people in the photograph? I don't know. It's queer, yes, it's queer that he remarks only her. Do you think he loved her? Why? Well, because he remarks only her. So perhaps he loved her. It's funny that you should think that. We must think alike. Thank you, Jonathan, he says. I've actually thought a lot about it, without having any good reason to. He was 18 and she was, what, about 15? He had just lost a wife and daughter when the Nazis raided his shtetl. Trachenbrod, right. For all I know, the writing doesn't have anything to do with the picture. It could be that he just used this for scrap paper. So, you know, we can't even rely on it being a label. And there is the uncertainty. And of course, as you know, her identity is never revealed. We never find her. We never encounter her, except transposed onto someone else in Lister. And at the center of this whole venture, then, is an absence. She's not there. We never get to see the photograph. Have you ever thought about that? It would be easy enough to do, wouldn't it? Just to give us the photograph at the front of the book. Well, it's not given to us. Because I think that's partly the point. There is an absence when we search for things that really matter. We talked about this previously. You want Alex to be real. I do too. It's natural as readers that we want him to be real. But there's nothing. There's nothing behind the Alex character. He's not real. Anyway, I don't want to labour that point. But I do think that Jonathan Safran Foer is therefore saying something quite profound about photography, and about what happens to us as spectators. I think what he's saying is that we see what we want to see until or unless we see ourselves as target in the way that the grandfather does, or until or unless the pathos captures us and reveals something to ourselves about ourselves. And that's the power that a photograph can have. And it's only likely to do that if it gives us a punctum moment. So back to what I was saying at the beginning of this video, if the 4 short stories sort of explore the limits of photography, its dangers, its problems, this novel, I think, is taking us somewhere else. It's taking us to the notion of a truth revealed in photography that obtains beyond language, or shall we say before language. It takes us to the recognition that photographs can be very powerful in their pathos, in revealing afresh or anew aspects of our own identities. And I think the novel is taking us to the photograph as capable of having a transformative power. There are a couple of moments in the novel where we pretty much have the aperture, the pinhole. We have characters looking through holes and seeing things afresh or anew because of that. I don't know if you can think of any of these moments. One of them is when the women are looking at baby Brod. Do you remember that? Through the hole in the side of the synagogue. Page 20. The cellar was filled with runoff from the Brod, the river, and an egg-sized hole was cut out of the synagogue's back wall, through which one woman at a time could see only the ark and the feet of the dangling men, some of which, to add insult to insult, were caked with shit. It was through this hole that the women of the shtetl took turns viewing my great-great-great-great-grandmother, the baby Brod. Many were convinced, perhaps because of the new baby's perfectly adult features, that she was of an evil nature, a sign from the devil himself. But more likely their mixed feelings were inspired by the hole. From such a distance, palms pressed against the partition, an eye in an absent egg, they couldn't satisfy any of their mothering instincts. The hole wasn't even large enough to show all of the baby at once. And they had to piece together mental collages of her from each of the fragmented views. The fingers connected to the palm, which was attached to the wrist, which was at the end of the arm, which fit under the shoulder socket. They learned to hate her unknowability, her untouchability, the collage of her. So if that's the kind of negative way that the aperture can transform one's perception of something, the positive way in which it can happen takes us to that interaction between Brod and the Kolka when they start looking at each other through the aperture in the wall. Do you remember this? This is 134. She cut a small hole in the wall to allow him to speak to her from the adjoining bedroom, to which he had exiled himself. And a one-way flap was built into the door through which food could be passed. And that's how it was for the last year of their marriage. When she was brave enough, she would stick one of her fingers through the hole. So it becomes an erotic interaction here. And as we find out on the next page, they made love through the hole. And they lived with the hole. The absence that defined it became a presence that defined them. Life was a small negative space, cut out of the eternal solidity, and for the first time it felt precious, and not like all the words that had come to mean nothing, but like the last breath of a drowning victim. Finally, this is a novel about love, isn't it? I hope you agree. I think it is. But it's not simple. So on the one hand, we have in Alex the kind of Valentine's Day notion of love. Love and happiness, love and bliss, love and ecstasy. And when I say in Alex, I mean in Jonathan's own alter ego, right? His own psyche, we have that. We all do, I guess. And it's revealed when Alex writes to Jonathan. Yeah, 240. He says, I must make a simple question, which is, what is wrong with you? If your grandfather loves the gypsy girl, and I'm certain that he does, why does he not leave with her? She would make him so happy. And yet he declines happiness. This is not reasonable, Jonathan. But this is because for Jonathan, love is not just that. It's also darker and painful and difficult. Broad introduces us to that, doesn't she? Look at 79. Broad discovered 620 or 613 sadnesses, each perfectly unique. Broad's life was a slow realization that the world was not for her, and that for whatever reason she would never be happy and honest at the same time. And then across the page, so she encounters all these things, and she just writes in a diary, I don't love you. I don't love you. Poem too long, I don't love you. Lunch in a bowl, I don't love you. Everything was just a thing, mired completely in its thingness. If we were to open to a random page in her journal, which she must have kept and kept with her at all times, we would find some rendering of the following sentiment. I am not in love. So she had to satisfy herself with the idea of love, loving the loving of things whose existence she didn't care at all about. Love itself became the object of her love. So how does that change for her? It changes in her encounter with the Kalka in a painful declaration and realization that Yankel is not her father. And that interaction happens again through the hole, through the aperture. This is 139. I have to tell you something, the Kalka says. It's okay. He pressed his lips to the hole. Yankel was not your real father. The minutes were unstrung. They fell to the floor and rolled through the house, losing themselves. I love you, she said, and for the first time in her life, the words had meaning. This connection of love with happiness and love with pain takes us, I think, to the overarching image of the novel, which is a visual image. Everything is illuminated. So, for the love mingling with happiness as an expression of happiness, we have the lovers on Tracking Day making love. And the friction of their copulation creates a light that can be seen from space. 95. From space, astronauts can see people making love as a tiny speck of light. Not light exactly, but a glow that could be mistaken for light. A coital radiance that takes generations to pour like honey through the darkness to the astronaut's eyes. In about 1.5 centuries, after the lovers who made the glow will have long since been laid permanently on their backs, metropolises will be seen from space. They will glow all year. Smaller cities will also be seen, but with great difficulty. Shtetls will be virtually impossible to spot. individual couples invisible. Some nights, some places are a little brighter. It's difficult to stare at New York City, da da da. Tracking Day is the only time all year when the tiny village of Tracking Broad can be seen from space. When enough copulative voltage is generated to sex the Polish-Ukrainian skies electric. We're here, the glow of 1804 will say in 1.5 centuries. We're here and we're alive. But there is another visual image which can be seen from space, and it is the synagogue burning with Jews trapped inside. There is the pain. And that's another sense in which everything is illuminated. And it is the pinprick of that, I think, that flows throughout this book like a river, and which is designed to prick us so that we remind ourselves and tell ourselves that we will never forget. I think that's what this novel is about. Okay, now, you're going to have to write a couple of essays in your final, and the format is going to be the same as the midterm, okay? So it'll be in 2 parts. In the first part, an essay no more than 1,000 words on 2 of the 4 short stories that we've covered. Choose them as you wish. And I guess I'm going to be asking you to write about how they are saying something about subject identity, how these stories are examining how the photographic process impacts differently on us depending upon whether we are the operator, target, or spectator. So, I mean, I've covered all of that in the videos, and so you'll just identify the stories that you want to write about and draw on examples and quotes as you wish. Okay, so now in the second part, it will be obviously an essay I'm going to ask you to write, again, no more than 1,000 words, on the novel Everything is Illuminated. And I suppose I've broken it down into 2 parts looking back on it. So in the previous video, which was set up by the one before, we were looking at how the novel is postmodern in its construction and themes. So I guess that could be one essay if you wanted to write on that. And then in this video, of course, we've been looking at how the novel is exploring the photographic process. So I guess that would be another topic for an essay if that interests you more. With regards to both essays that you write, the same ground rules apply. Okay, so you know, we're looking for, in terms of my expectations, a grammatically correct and well-organized essay. And for some of you, quite a lot of you actually, having been through your midterms now, that still remains a challenge. It's okay. I mean, you're first-year students, so these are things that you can still be working on and practicing. But yeah, I mean, for God's sake, proofread, right? Try not to make the same mistakes you made in the midterm. That's why I gave you the comments. So we want that, if possible. And then, as I've said before, if you just regurgitate what I say in these videos and use my examples, that's absolutely fine. Get yourself a decent grade and get out of the course. Whoopie-doo. If you want that top grade, of course, you will introduce more than I've said. And you will do that by academic research. What might you research? Well, it seems like photography would be a good place to start. Why not pick up Susan Sontag's book on photography? Fabulous, brilliant read. Maybe lift a few quotes from that, or from John Berger or anyone else you come across who's written about the photographic process. So you could take me there, bring in some quotes, bring in some maybe biographical quotes from any of these writers. Really up to you, right? And where you go with this is your business. But this is how you impress me, I suppose. Okay, I think that's it. I'm very much looking forward to looking at your photographic reports. That's going to be interesting. I think this whole punctum exploration thing is interesting. It's a creative process. So I'm looking forward to that. And I guess that's it. I don't know if I'm going to see any of you down the track in any of my other courses, perhaps in the classroom. On the basis that that might happen, I shall say bye for now. Okay.